Hello, everybody. On Kayfabe all day. This is Solomon. So today I want to talk about Jimmy Snuka's legacy, and I got a picture here of the Superfly. This was an old Main Event Wrestling magazine from 1989. Jimmy Snuka returns to the WWF. You know, full disclosure, Jimmy Snuka is my absolute favorite wrestler of all time. Now, I started watching wrestling in early 1983, about January 83. And that's exactly around the time that the WWF came to Los Angeles and took over Mike LaBelle's promotion. And Snuka was immediately my favorite wrestler. And so I'm a huge Jimmy Superfly Snuka fan. Now, we know that there recently was a Dark Side of the Ring episode regarding him and Nancy Argentina. And that whole episode. And I didn't find out about that until somewhere in the mid-90s through, just through the Observer, and hearing about Snuka possibly killing somebody was shocking to me. And obviously, Jimmy Snuka's wrestling career speaks for itself. The guy was a legend. He was so unique in a world, in a profession of unique men, and that's what pro wrestling was. It's a profession that was attracted unique individuals, and the more unique you were, the better, because that meant box office. In a profession of unique individuals, Jimmy Snuka even stood out from them as being unique, and obviously had a phenomenal physique for a big man. He was a high flyer for a big man. Now, usually, especially in those days, high flyers were your smaller guys like a Tiger Mask, a Dynamite Kid. But Jimmy Snuka was a high flyer, but he could wrestle on the mat. He could brawl. He was a heel, super babyface. And legendary matches in the Mid-Atlantic territory against Ricky Steamboat, Ric Flair, him and Paul Orndorff, against the tag team of, I believe, the Anderson brothers and Flair and Valentine. His tag team with Terry Gordy in Georgia. His matches against Bruiser Brody and tag teaming with Bruiser Brody in Japan. Also, if you can get a glimpse, I got about three matches of Jimmy Snuka in Portland back in the late 70s. So those are cool. And of course, needless to say, Bob Backlund, Cage Match 82 in Morocco in 83. But what should be his legacy? Because in the last few years of his life, the Nancy Argentina controversy was given new life. And a lot of people believe that Jimmy Snuka should be included in the Chris Benoit narrative of someone who shouldn't be given any accolades. Either that, or they say because Jimmy Snuka still looked upon as this great wrestler, we should still consider Benoit. But I submit to you, friends, these are two entirely different situations. We know what Chris Benoit did. Being that Chris Benoit's situation was in the modern age of news coverage, social media, the internet, national TV, in an era where pro wrestling was covered by the mainstream whenever there was a big situation that happened. So with Chris Benoit, we know what he did. The optics are there. Okay, we saw this in real time in terms of the death, the reports of his murder-suicide, of Nancy, of the fallen angel, his wife, of his child, and of course, Chris Benoit was on performance-enhancing drugs, human growth hormone, steroids, whatever that was, whatever that he took. So we know that Chris Benoit murdered his wife and his son. And we know this appears to be premeditated. And then, of course, he kills himself. Now let's go to Jimmy Snuka's situation. Jimmy Snuka was his incident with Nancy Argentina in 1983 was a time when pro wrestling was not covered by the mainstream in any way, shape, or form. Now, pro wrestling was on the verge of being covered by the mainstream, but this was right before it was. Now, we know that there had been a couple of incidents in local newspapers in Allentown talking about an episode in the hotel, I think the George Washington Motor Lodge, where Jimmy Snuka was seen naked dragging Nancy by the hair through the hallway of the hotel. The police come. It took 9 police officers plus 2 police dogs to subdue Jimmy Snuka. And then, of course, later on, the incident where she died, and according to Jimmy Snuka, she slipped and fell and hit her head. And obviously, Jimmy Snuka and Nancy Argentina had a volatile, violent relationship. Obviously, Jimmy Snuka on her. Her sister even reported seeing, I think it was her sister reported seeing Snuka slam Nancy against the wall. And Snuka being a very aggressive, violent individual. Apparently, even Buddy Rogers saw this about Jimmy and wanted to separate himself from Jimmy. And this is around 82, 83. Or 82, when Buddy Rogers was initially Jimmy's manager, I believe. So the facts are that Snuka committed acts of domestic violence against Nancy Argentina. Now, as bad as that is, that alone should not tarnish the legacy of Jimmy Snuka, simply because where does it end? Because we know a lot of pro wrestlers have had these issues in their personal lives. Because the pro wrestling industry is one that takes a toll on the body, on the mind. It is an industry where even back before the expansion days when Vince McMahon took the WWF National, the travel schedule for these pro wrestlers was brutal. And for a wrestler whose gimmick was his body, you had to make sure you stayed in shape. You traveled, so thereby oftentimes you were taking steroids and sometimes taking, uppers to be able to stay up, to travel and drive to the next town, downers to be able to sleep. This is just the culture of the pro wrestling industry at the time. And the fact that there were domestic violence issues between a wrestler and his girlfriend or wife. So we're going to put that aside. It's wrong what Jimmy did. Obviously, that's not right in terms of the domestic violence incidents. But we're going to talk specifically about the night she died, or the day she died, and why the incident with Snuka and Anthony Argentina is different than Benoit and his wife Nancy and his child, and then killing himself. And why Benoit and Snuka should be looked at differently in the pro wrestling community. Benoit's actions were all out there for everybody to see, and there was no doubt of what he did. So he, for a fact, killed 2 people and then killed himself. The night of Nancy Argentina's death, there's still a shroud of mystery over that. It wasn't covered by the mainstream media. We didn't see photographs. We didn't see real-time news coverage of that. So we don't have the optics. With Chris Benoit, you have optics. You have facts. With Snuka and Nancy Argentina, there's enough room for doubt. Although, if you would ask somebody, even myself included, if you were to ask me and put a gun on my head, do I think Snuka killed her? I would say that he contributed to her death. I would probably presume that he took an aggressive action against her, which caused her death out of a momentary fit of rage or anger. Still bad, but we don't have facts on that. There's a shroud of mystery over the death of Nancy Argentina. Jimmy Snuka was never convicted, in a court of law. Obviously, Benoit wasn't, because he killed himself, but we know for a fact that he killed his son and his wife. as bad as Jimmy Snuka's actions against Nancy Argentina before that, it's a world of difference having domestic issues with a girlfriend than it is killing your own son, a little boy. To compare those two things, I think, is foolish. You're killing a defenseless little child against someone versus having a volatile relationship with a spouse, and you lose your cool, and then as a result of that, she dies. So you have premeditation of Chris Benoit versus a momentary fit of rage with Jimmy Snuka. If that's indeed what happened, but we don't know. Again, with Chris Benoit, you have optics because everybody saw the results of what he did through news coverage, through the internet. With Snuka, we don't have that. All we have is a couple newspaper clippings about what happened in the George Washington Motor Lodge. We have one newspaper clipping, and this was prior to her death. And then we have just testimony of her Nancy Argentina's sister seeing Jimmy Snuka being very aggressive and saying things that were very aggressive. Okay, and we have enough, there's enough room for doubt with that night that Nancy Argentina died that it should not severely taint Snuka's image. Now, if you want to say, well, Snuka was a bad guy because he abused her, the whole incident at the George Washington Motor Lodge, that should tarnish his legacy, you're in power, you're free to do that. But then the problem is we can go down a long list of pro wrestlers whose legacies should be tarnished because of having a bad relationship with somebody that was even violent. The difference is with Snuka, I can understand where that would tarnish his legacy somewhat because she ended up dying possibly as a result from his actions, but we don't have facts on that. So the Chris Benoit situation, 180 degrees different. He premeditatedly killed a defenseless child, his own son. Snuka didn't do that. If Snuka's actions led to her death that night, it was a momentary fit of rage rather than premeditation. There is a difference. Even the courts acknowledge that. And there's a difference between killing a little child and another adult. Both are bad. And we have optics of Chris Benoit. We don't have optics of Jimmy Snuka. Now, both seem to be infused with chemical substances during the time frames they were involved in these situations. Jimmy Snuka reportedly was coked up a lot during this time period, which led to his having to go to rehab in 1984 and then eventually his leaving the WWF in spring of 1985. Benoit obviously was a huge steroid abuser. You could just look at him. And apparently he had a Napoleon complex because he was a little guy in a big man's world. Okay? So absolutely Chris Benoit should be looked at differently than Jimmy Snuka. I still look to Jimmy Snuka as a legend. There's enough doubt in his story to look at him that way. Chris Benoit, it's all out there for everybody to see. There is no room for doubt. There's premeditation, killing an innocent child, and then his wife, and then himself. Snuka had a volatile relationship with Nancy Argentina. We don't know what happened that night. Nobody knows. And that's just the bottom line facts. Now, I believe in God. I do believe that if Snuka got away with something there and never made it right in terms of admitting what he did, then he'll be held accountable. But I don't know what happened that night. All right, you guys have a great day. Bye.